Frank Broder had always been a lover of adventure. A 38-year-old Australian, he thrived on exploring the world's wildest landscapes, capturing their beauty through his camera lens. The Canadian Rockies had long been on his bucket list, and now, after saving for years, he was finally here. His itinerary was packed with hikes, each promising majestic views and close encounters with untouched wilderness. Frank had started his trek early on this particular day, joining a group of hikers on a well-traveled trail. The scenery was breathtaking. Towering peaks, vibrant meadows, and the distant sound of cascading waterfalls. As the group took a break near a viewpoint, Frank, ever the wanderer, spotted a narrow path leading into the forest. Ignoring the warning signs to stay on the marked trail, he ventured off alone, driven by curiosity and the hope of snapping an extraordinary photo. The air grew cooler as he entered the dense woods. Sunlight filtered weakly through the canopy, casting shadows on the forest floor. Frank walked carefully, his boots crunching over fallen leaves and twigs. The forest seemed alive with the sounds of birds and the rustling of small animals. It felt thrilling, as if he were discovering a secret world. He paused near a cluster of trees, setting his camera to capture the perfect shot of a patch of wildflowers. As he focused, he heard a rustling sound from behind him. Turning slowly, his heart skipped a beat. A huge grizzly bear stood less than 30 feet away, its two cubs nestled among the undergrowth. Frank froze. He knew enough about bears to understand the danger he was in. The mother bear had already locked eyes on him, her body tensed, ears flattened. Frank's proximity to her cubs was an unforgivable offense in the bear's eyes. She let out a low growl, a warning that sent a chill down Frank's spine. Without further hesitation, the bear began its attack. Frank barely had time to flinch before the bear closed the distance, her sheer speed and power overwhelming. She hit him with full force, knocking him off his feet and onto his side. His camera was flung from his hands, skidding across the forest floor. The air was driven from his lungs as the bear's immense weight pinned him down. The first swipe came with terrifying speed. The bear's claws tore through Frank's jacket and into his torso, ripping flesh and muscle. Frank screamed a sound of pure agony that echoed through the woods. He tried to roll away, but the bear bit down on his shoulder, her teeth sinking deep. It seemed like the bear wanted to maul every part of his body it could get its claws on. Frank knew he was in big trouble. He cursed his decision to stray from the group and found himself wishing he could turn back time. Pain blinded him. It was strong enough to silence his wandering thoughts and help him focus on his slim chances of survival. Frank thrashed wildly, his arms flailing to fend off the attack. He managed to grab a sturdy branch nearby and swung it desperately at the bear's face. The makeshift weapon struck her snout, causing her to recoil as if baffled by the man's audacity. But the respite was short-lived. With a furious growl, the bear swiped again, striking his neck. The force of the blow sent him sprawling, his vision blurring from the loss of blood. Frank's instincts screamed at him to keep fighting, but his strength quickly faded. The bear loomed over him, her claws raking across his legs to ensure he posed no further threat. He kicked weakly, his boot glancing off her massive frame, but it was useless. The bear was relentless, driven by the primal need to protect her cubs. Nearby hikers heard the commotion, Frank's screams cutting through the stillness like a knife. They dropped their packs and ran toward the sound, their hearts pounding with fear and urgency. As they approached, they saw the bear, its massive body standing over Frank's crumpled form. One hiker carried a canister of bear spray. He fumbled to retrieve it from his pack, his hands trembling. With a quick burst, he sprayed the bear, the orange cloud enveloping its face. The bear snarled, shaking its head violently, and stepped back. More hikers joined, shouting and waving their arms to scare it away. The bear hesitated, her ears twitching. She glanced toward her cubs, who had retreated into the bushes during the commotion. Deciding the situation was growing even more dangerous to her cubs, the bear turned and lumbered back into the forest, her growls fading into the distance. The hikers rushed to Frank's side. His body was battered and bloodied, his clothes shredded. One hiker checked for a pulse, their face falling as they realized it was too late. Frank's eyes were half open, staring blankly at the canopy above. The forest was silent again, as if mourning his loss. They tried to keep their composure as they radioed for help, but the gravity of what had happened was overwhelming. Frank had come to the Rockies seeking adventure, but found something more brutal. When rescue teams arrived, they secured the area and transported Frank's body out of the woods. The incident was a stark reminder of the dangers of venturing into bear country. For those who had witnessed it, the memory of Frank's screams and the sight of the charging bear would haunt them for years. The Canadian Rockies, so often a symbol of beauty and wonder, now bore the weight of a tragic reminder. Nature was as deadly as it was awe-inspiring. Frank Broder's final moments were a testament to the wild's untamed power, a harsh lesson etched into the silent wilderness. On August 12, 2023, Mike Henderson, a 42-year-old mechanical engineer from Grand Rapids, Michigan, decided to take his 12-year-old son, Luke, on a weekend camping trip to a national forest in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Mike, an avid outdoorsman, cherished moments spent in nature and wanted to pass his love for the wilderness to Luke. The trip was meant to be a bonding experience and an opportunity for Luke to learn survival skills and appreciate the beauty of the natural world. An energetic and curious boy, Luke had been looking forward to the trip for weeks. After a school project on Michigan's ecosystems, he had recently developed an interest in hiking and wildlife. Armed with a new backpack and a guidebook on local animals, he was eager to explore the forest trails with his father. Their chosen campsite was nestled near a small stream, surrounded by towering pines and the gentle rustling of leaves. The location was serene, far from the busy city life they were accustomed to. Mike had meticulously planned the trip, packing a sturdy tent, food supplies, and safety equipment, including a bear spray canister. They spent their first evening setting up camp, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories under the star-lit sky. The following morning, the father and son duo explored one of the forest's well-known trails. Luke led the way, excitedly pointing out birds and identifying trees from his guidebook. Mike walked behind him, proud of his son's enthusiasm and attentiveness. The trail meandered through dense foliage, with occasional clearings offering glimpses of sunlit meadows. As they ventured deeper into the woods, the atmosphere grew quieter. The rustling of leaves and birds chirping seemed to fade, replaced by an eerie stillness. Luke paused, noticing tracks on the trail that his guidebook identified as bear prints. Mike reassured him that black bears were usually timid and avoided humans. They continued walking, their conversation lighthearted, but both remained vigilant. Suddenly, the calm was shattered by a loud rustling in the underbrush. Before they could react, a large black bear emerged onto the trail, its dark eyes fixed on them. Probably startled by their presence, the bear stood motionless momentarily before charging toward them. Luke froze in fear as the massive animal closed the distance. Mike shouted for Luke to run, but the bear reached him first, knocking him to the ground. The force of the impact sent Luke sprawling, his guidebook and backpack scattering across the trail. The bear's claws grazed his arm, leaving shallow cuts as he tried to shield himself. Acting instinctually, Mike grabbed a large rock and hurled it at the bear, hitting it on the shoulder. The bear then turned its attention to Mike and growled loudly. The bear swiped at Mike, its claws raking across his side, causing sharp pain and drawing blood. Despite the injury, Mike managed to distract the bear long enough for Luke to crawl away from its immediate reach. Mike's heart pounded as he tried to focus through the sharp pain in his side. The gashes from the bear's claws stung with every movement, but adrenaline kept him going. He waved his arms and shouted, hoping to keep the bear's attention away from Luke, who was crawling toward the ravine a few feet away. The bear hesitated, its head swiveling between the two figures before growling deeply and stepping forward. Luke reached the ravine's edge, his injured arm trembling as he clutched at the roots to steady himself. The shallow cuts on his arm bled lightly but were enough to sap his strength. He looked back to see his father gripping another rock, poised to defend them. The sight of Mike standing his ground gave Luke the strength to keep moving. Mike hurled the second rock, this time hitting the bear's chest. The animal flinched, giving him a critical moment to retreat toward the ravine where Luke was waiting. The bear's growl grew louder, but it didn't follow immediately, as if trying to decide whether to pursue it. Mike reached the ravine's edge and quickly helped Luke down, ignoring the burning pain in his side. Together, they scrambled into the gully, finding temporary refuge beneath a cluster of fallen trees. The bear appeared at the edge, peering down at them with piercing eyes. Its growls echoed through the ravine, but it didn't descend. Mike clutched a broken branch, prepared to fight if the animal came closer. Minutes felt like hours as the bear circled the ravine, sniffing the air. Eventually, it turned and retreated into the forest, leaving Mike and Luke trembling with relief. The gully provided them temporary safety, but their ordeal was far from over. Mike's side continued to bleed, and he knew they needed medical attention soon. He tore a strip from his shirt to wrap around the wound, applying pressure to slow the bleeding. Luke, though shaken, helped his father secure the makeshift bandage. With the bear gone, they began slowly climbing out of the ravine. Mike leaned heavily on Luke, their progress hindered by their injuries and the uneven terrain. The forest seemed eerily quiet, as if it were holding its breath after the chaos. After what felt like hours, they reached the main trail. A group of hikers appeared in the distance, drawn by the sounds of their earlier struggle. One carried a first aid kit and quickly attended to Mike's wounds. Another hiker used a satellite phone to call for help, and within an hour, park rangers arrived. The rangers transported Mike and Luke to a nearby medical facility where their injuries were treated. Mike's side required stitches, and Luke's arm was bandaged to prevent infection. Both were declared stable, with no life-threatening damage. The ordeal left them physically and emotionally exhausted, but they were grateful to be alive. In the following days, the story of their encounter spread through the community, sparking discussions about the importance of wilderness safety. Park officials issued warnings about increased bear activity, urging visitors to carry bear spray and avoid traveling alone in remote areas. For Mike and Luke, the experience strengthened their bond and taught them the value of preparation and resilience. Despite the fear and pain, they vowed to continue exploring the outdoors, now with a deeper respect for nature's unpredictable power. On August 12, 2023, 4 friends from Seattle, Lisa Howard, Ben Carter, Mark Davis, and Julia Thompson, set out on a long-planned camping adventure to Alaska's remote Kenai Peninsula. This trip was their way of escaping the stress of their daily lives and reconnecting with nature. Lisa, 27, a school teacher, was the group planner. She meticulously researched the trails and campgrounds. Ben, 29, a firefighter, was the group's protector, always ready to handle emergencies. Mark, 28, a software engineer, loved adventure but often underestimated risks. Julia, 26, a nurse, was the calm presence who kept everyone grounded. The group arrived at the Kenai Peninsula in the early afternoon. The drive had been long, but the sight of the dense forests and majestic mountains made it worthwhile. They found a secluded spot near a small river to set up camp. The area was known for its stunning views and abundant wildlife. They pitched their tents, set up a small fire pit, and shared stories about their adventures. The day was peaceful. Mark tried his hand at fishing while Julia and Lisa explored the nearby trails, collecting wildflowers and taking pictures. Ben kept busy chopping wood for the campfire. As the sun set, the group gathered around the fire, enjoying roasted marshmallows and discussing their plans for the next day. Laughter echoed through the forest, but they made a critical mistake in their excitement. They left food scraps outside their tents, unknowingly inviting danger. Night fell, and the forest became eerily quiet. The only sounds were the crackling of the dying fire and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. As the friends settled into their tents, they felt excitement and tranquility, unaware of the danger lurking nearby. Around midnight, a loud crashing sound jolted them awake. Lisa was the first to peek out of her tent. Her heart sank as she saw a massive brown bear rummaging through their campsite. The bear, drawn by the scent of food, was tearing through their belongings with alarming force. Lisa quickly alerted the others, and panic set in. Ben grabbed a flashlight to protect the group and cautiously exited his tent. He hoped the light would scare the bear away, but the animal turned its attention to him. The bear growled and charged, knocking Ben to the ground. The bear's claws tore into his side, leaving deep gashes as he tried to shield himself. The others screamed, scrambling to find a way to help. Lisa found the bear spray in their supplies and hurriedly instructed Mark and Julia to stay back. She aimed the spray at the bear with trembling hands, hoping to drive it away. Lisa took a deep breath and aimed the bear spray directly at the massive animal. The mist hit the bear's face, causing it to retreat momentarily. The bear growled and shook its head, agitated but hesitant to advance further. Mark and Julia rushed to Ben, who was still on the ground, groaning in pain. Ben's side was covered in deep gashes, and his breathing was labored, but he was conscious. They carefully dragged him away from the bear, while Lisa held her ground, spraying the animal to keep it at bay. The bear hesitated, growled again, and then lumbered back into the forest. The group stood frozen for a moment, listening to the sound of the bear retreating into the darkness. The tension lingered, but the immediate danger seemed to have passed. Julia quickly assessed Ben's injuries with their limited first aid supplies. His wounds were bleeding heavily, and he showed signs of shock. They applied pressure to the worst cuts and wrapped him in a sleeping bag to keep him warm. The group knew they couldn't stay at the campsite. The bear could return at any moment, and Ben's condition worsened. They decided to pack up as much as they could and leave immediately. Mark and Lisa worked quickly, gathering essentials while Julia stayed with Ben, reassuring him and monitoring his condition. The adrenaline pushed them to act swiftly despite their fear and exhaustion. They decided to head toward the trailhead, which was several miles away. With no cell service and no way to call for help, they fashioned a makeshift stretcher using tent poles and their jackets to carry Ben. The journey was grueling. The uneven terrain and darkness made every step a challenge. Lisa led the way with a flashlight, scanning for any signs of the bear, while Mark and Julia took turns carrying the stretcher. Hours passed as they navigated through the dense forest. The group was exhausted, but they couldn't afford to stop. Ben's condition remained critical, and they knew they had to reach safety before his injuries worsened. The thought of the bear stalking them from the shadows added to their anxiety, but they pressed on, driven by the determination to save their friend. As dawn broke, the group finally reached the trailhead where they flagged down a passing vehicle. The driver immediately called for emergency services, and within minutes an ambulance arrived to transport Ben to the nearest hospital. The group collapsed in relief, knowing they had survived the night. At the hospital, doctors worked to stabilize Ben. He required stitches and treatment for blood loss, but was expected to recover fully after several weeks of rest. The incident was reported to park authorities, who commended the group for their quick thinking and bravery. The site was temporarily closed to investigate the bear's behavior and ensure the safety of future visitors. The experience left the friends shaken, but grateful to be alive. They vowed never to underestimate the dangers of the wilderness again, and hoped their story would remind others of the importance of proper preparation and respect for wildlife. August 2023. Emma and Chris, a married couple from Seattle, embarked on a much-anticipated hiking trip in the Montana wilderness. In their mid-30s, they shared a passion for exploring remote trails and immersing themselves in nature. Emma worked as a graphic designer, while Chris was a teacher. Despite their busy lives, they often made time for weekend getaways, cherishing the peace and beauty of the outdoors. Their latest adventure was meant to be a serene escape from the hustle of city life. The couple chose a trail near a national park in northwestern Montana, known for its breathtaking views of rugged mountains, dense forests, and sparkling rivers. The path was relatively isolated and favored by experienced hikers seeking solitude. Emma and Chris thoroughly researched the trail and packed bear spray, whistles, and a first aid kit to ensure they were prepared for potential wildlife encounters. Though they knew the region's reputation for bear activity, they felt confident in their precautions. On their second day, the couple reached a stunning riverbank surrounded by vibrant wildflowers. They decided to take a break and capture the scenery. Chris set up his camera on a tripod, while Emma wandered a few feet away, marveling at the crystal-clear water. The air was filled with the gentle sound of flowing water and the occasional chirp of birds. It was everything they had hoped for, peaceful and picturesque. They didn't know that a grizzly bear was feeding nearby, hidden by the thick undergrowth along the riverbank. The bear had been startled by their movements and sounds. As Emma approached a cluster of wildflowers for a better photo, the bear emerged from the brush, its massive form suddenly visible. At first, it paused, observing them with wary eyes, but within moments, it charged. Chris yelled to Emma as the bear's thundering steps closed the distance. The couple tried to retreat, but were trapped in a narrow trail bordered by steep, rocky slopes. The bear was relentless, and within seconds it reached Emma, knocking her to the ground. She screamed as the bear swiped at her, leaving deep gashes on her shoulder and back. Desperate to save her, Chris grabbed his walking stick and struck the bear repeatedly. Undeterred by Chris's efforts, the bear focused on Emma, who lay defenseless on the ground. Her arms and legs bore fresh wounds as she tried to shield herself from the powerful swipes. Chris continued to strike the bear, shouting and using everything he could to distract it. After what felt like an eternity, the bear finally stopped its attack, its ears flicking at a sound in the distance. With a low growl, it retreated into the woods, leaving the couple shaken and severely injured. Emma lay on the rocky trail, trembling from pain and fear. Chris dropped his walking stick and rushed to her side. Blood stained her jacket and pants, and her breathing was shallow. He quickly checked her injuries. Emma had deep claw marks on her back and shoulder, along with puncture wounds on her arms and legs. Despite her pain, she managed to whisper that she could move, though every breath seemed to strain her body. Chris knew they had to act fast. The bear could return at any moment and were far from help. He wrapped Emma's wounds with bandages from their first aid kit, using strips of clothing to apply pressure to slow the bleeding. He helped her to her feet with great effort, supporting her weight as they moved slowly down the trail. Every step was agonizing for Emma, but she gritted her teeth and focused on moving forward. The trail, which had seemed beautiful and serene hours earlier, now felt endless and treacherous. Chris constantly glanced behind them, his ears straining for any sound that might signal the bear's return. Emma leaned heavily on him, her face pale and her strength fading. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the forest, and the temperature dropped rapidly. They heard voices in the distance after nearly an hour of slow progress. A group of hikers appeared around a bend, their headlamps cutting through the growing darkness. The group froze at the sight of Emma's bloodied figure, but Chris quickly explained what had happened. The hikers sprang into action, offering their jackets to keep Emma warm and helping to stabilize her wounds further. One of the hikers had a satellite phone and immediately called for help. The group decided to stay together, forming a protective circle around Emma and Chris as they waited. Every rustle in the bushes made their hearts race, but the bear did not return. The wait felt like an eternity, but eventually the sound of a helicopter broke the silence. Search and rescue personnel arrived, and Emma was carefully lifted onto a stretcher. The helicopter flew them to the nearest hospital, where Emma underwent hours of surgery to treat her wounds. Doctors were amazed at her resilience, noting that she was lucky to be alive. Though physically unhurt, Chris carried the emotional weight of the ordeal, staying by Emma's side throughout her recovery. The attack left both of them shaken, but it also raised awareness of the dangers of hiking in bear territory. Park officials reviewed the incident and implemented stricter guidelines for hikers, including enhanced safety measures and more prominent warnings about wildlife encounters. Emma and Chris later shared their story with local media, hoping to educate others about the importance of preparation and respect for nature. Emma's injuries included multiple deep gashes and puncture wounds, requiring extensive treatment, but she ultimately made a full recovery. Though the memories of the attack will remain with them forever, Emma and Chris choose to focus on their survival and the lessons they have learned in the wilderness. In February 2022, Montana's Bob Marshall Wilderness lay draped in a pristine blanket of snow. The vast, rugged expanse stretched untouched for miles, its tranquility broken only by the distant howl of wind through towering pines. Few dared to venture into this unforgiving landscape in winter, when the cold was unrelenting and the wildlife retreated to the depths of survival. Yet Jack Hayes and Tom Walker, seasoned snowmobilers and thrill-seekers, were undeterred by the isolation or the biting winds that cut through the towering evergreens. They dismissed warnings from locals about the dangers of winter exploration and the hibernating grizzlies beneath the snow. To them, it was just another adventure, another claim to boldness. With their snowmobiles humming like restless predators, they carved through the pristine snowfields, leaving trails of churned frost in their wake. The world seemed muted in the vast wilderness. The only sounds were the distant rustling of wind and the occasional crack of ice. As they pushed deeper into the wilderness, adrenaline coursed through their veins, a potent mixture of defiance and exhilaration. The warnings about grizzlies had been clear. Bears, hibernating in dens concealed beneath thick layers of snow, were to be left undisturbed at all costs. A grizzly roused from its winter slumber could be lethal, its survival instincts honed to a razor's edge by months of fasting and vulnerability. But Jack and Tom, caught up in the thrill of exploration, paid little mind. Their snowmobiles tore across a steep ridge, the snow beneath them groaning under the weight of their machines. Suddenly, there was a sharp crack, an unnatural sound that froze the air around them. Jack's snowmobile dropped slightly, its treads sinking deeper into the snow. Before either could react, the ground collapsed in a spray of ice and powder. Beneath the crumbled snow lay a hollowed den, a sanctuary meant to shield its occupant from the world above. But now the sanctuary had been destroyed, and a force of nature emerged from its depths, an enraged grizzly bear. Its hulking form rose from the shadows of the collapsed den, patches of snow clinging to its matted fur. Its small, dark eyes glinted with fury, the low rumble of its growl slicing through the frozen air. Jack barely had time to react before the bear lunged, its immense weight slamming into him like an avalanche. The attack was ferocious, primal, a blur of claws, teeth, and the guttural roar of the enraged animal. Jack's snowmobile tipped over as he was thrown into the snow, his arm catching the brunt of the bear's swiping claws. Pain erupted through him, hot and blinding. Blood stained the pristine white snow as he struggled beneath the sheer power of the beast. Gripped by terror, Tom abandoned his snowmobile and bolted into the forest. The bear, sensing movement, turned its attention to the fleeing figure. It roared, its breath clouding in the cold air, before charging after Tom with alarming speed. Tom ran mindlessly, his boots sinking deep into the snow, each step a Herculean effort. Branches clawed at his face, the cold air burning his lungs with every ragged breath. He dared not look back, though the bear's snarls grew closer with each passing second. His only thought was an escape, a desperate flight through an endless maze of trees and snow. The chase felt endless. His legs screamed for relief as exhaustion and panic overtook him. By some twist of luck, Tom stumbled upon a narrow ravine. He slid down its icy slope, the sharp descent tearing at his clothes but putting distance between him and the pursuing bear. For hours he wandered, the adrenaline of the chase giving way to the creeping realization that he was lost. His gloves were damp from the snow. His fingers were growing numb and unresponsive. The cold seeped into his bones, and the sun sank lower in the sky, casting the wilderness into a dim, shadowy twilight. Meanwhile, Jack lay in the snow, his breath shallow, his body trembling with shock and pain. Blood seeped from deep gashes in his arm and torso, staining the snow a vivid red. The bear had long since abandoned him, its wrath redirected toward Tom, but the damage was done. He struggled to move, every slight shift sending waves of pain through his body. Yet he clung to life, his will to survive a flickering flame against the encroaching darkness. By the time rescuers found Jack 2 days later, his ordeal had left him on the brink of death. Hypothermia had set in, and his injuries were severe, but he was alive, a grim testament to his resilience. His survival came at a cost, however. The bear's attack had left him with permanent scars, both physical and psychological. His right arm, shredded by claws, was left partially immobile, and he would carry the memory of that day in every uneasy step into the wild. Tom's fate was far grimmer. When search teams finally located his body, it was huddled beneath the shelter of a fallen tree, his face pale and his hands blackened from frostbite. He had evaded the bear, but the wilderness had claimed him in the end. Cold, exhaustion, and disorientation had proven insurmountable, and he had succumbed to the elements alone and far from help. The tragedy rippled through the local community and beyond, sparking debates about backcountry safety and respect for wildlife. Wildlife experts explained that the grizzly's aggression directly resulted from disrupted hibernation. Bears relied on undisturbed rest to survive the harsh winter, and being startled awake triggered an instinctual heightened aggression born of fear and desperation. The story of Jack and Tom became a cautionary tale, a grim reminder of the wilderness's unforgiving nature. Conservationists and outdoor groups called for stricter regulations on winter activities in sensitive habitats, emphasizing the need to protect wildlife during their most vulnerable months. For Jack, the lessons of that February day were seared into his memory. The wilderness was not merely a playground for human thrill-seekers, but a delicate ecosystem that demanded respect. Mount Elbrus is a majestic sentinel in the rugged Caucasus Mountains, its snow-clad peaks drawing adventurers worldwide. In July 2021, 4 climbers, Olga Kravtsova, Sergei Ivanov, and 2 companions, embarked on a mission to scale this formidable peak. Experienced mountaineers Olga and Sergei were no strangers to the challenges of high-altitude expeditions. To prepare for their ascent, the group spent their first night at a lower elevation to acclimatize. The weather was crisp, and the air was thin but manageable. At 5,642 meters, Mount Elbrus demanded respect, not just for its towering height, but for its concealed perils. Avalanches, frostbite, and sudden storms were common threats, yet none of these dangers matched the silent, primal threat prowling the area that night. Unbeknownst to the climbers, a Russian grizzly bear, famished from a brutal winter, was wandering near their camp. This bear, displaced by melting glaciers and dwindling prey in the valleys, had been driven to higher elevations in desperate search of food. That evening, the climbers shared a modest meal, laughing and discussing their strategy for the ascent. Exhaustion soon claimed them, and by midnight the camp was silent. Nestled in their sleeping bags, the climbers drifted into uneasy dreams, unaware that the delicate balance of their world was about to shatter. It began as a faint rustling, a sound so innocuous that it might have been dismissed as wind brushing against the tents. But within moments, the quiet gave way to chaos. A colossal shadow loomed, its massive frame blocking the moon's faint glow. The grizzly bear, driven by hunger and the scent of food, had found its way to the camp. The first tent was ripped open with a ferocity that defied comprehension. Olga Kravtsova barely had time to register what was happening before she was dragged from her sleeping bag. The bear's claws tore through the tent's fabric as though it were paper, its guttural growls piercing the night. Olga screamed a sound that jolted Sergei Ivanov awake in the neighboring tent. Without hesitation, Sergei grabbed his ice axe, the closest weapon. Rushing toward the horrific scene, he swung the axe with all his strength, striking the bear's shoulder. The beast roared in pain and fury, releasing Olga momentarily. Bloodied and disoriented, she tried to crawl away, but the bear's attention quickly refocused on her. Sergei, undeterred, struck again, this time aiming for the bear's head. The blow glanced off the thick bone of its skull, enraging the animal further. With a speed that belied its massive size, the bear turned on Sergei, swiping at him with a paw the size of a dinner plate. The impact sent him sprawling, his ribs cracking under the force. Olga, still alive but gravely injured, watched in terror as Sergei fought valiantly. He managed to land another blow with the axe, this time embedding it into the bear's side. The animal reared up on its hind legs, towering over Sergei, before crashing down upon him with devastating weight. The two remaining climbers, paralyzed with fear in their tent, realized the severity of the attack only when Sergei's cries abruptly ceased. They unzipped their tent cautiously, their breath catching as they saw the carnage illuminated by the pale moonlight. Olga lay motionless, her body a broken silhouette against the snow. The bear stood over Sergei, its fur matted with blood. Panic seized them. Abandoning their belongings, they bolted downhill, their footsteps pounding against the frozen ground. The bear, distracted by the remains of its victims, did not pursue. Their flight through the darkness was a desperate bid for survival. Slipping and stumbling, they pressed on until the faint lights of a rescue outpost appeared in the distance. Collapsing before the startled rescue team, they gasped out fragmented accounts of the attack. The rescuers, equipped with firearms, set out cautiously toward the camp. By the time they arrived, the bear had vanished into the wilderness, leaving behind a scene of unspeakable devastation. The deaths of Olga Kravtsova and Sergei Ivanov sent shockwaves through the mountaineering community. These were not inexperienced climbers. They were seasoned veterans who had faced the harshest conditions nature could offer. Yet, their skill and preparation had not been enough to save them from the relentless force of a starving predator. Autopsies confirmed the brutality of the attack. Olga had suffered multiple fractures and severe blood loss, while Sergei's injuries indicated a prolonged struggle. His ice axe, found embedded in the snow near his body, bore testament to his bravery in the face of overwhelming odds. The incident sparked widespread discussion about the growing risks of wildlife encounters at high altitudes. Experts pointed to climate change as a driving factor. As glaciers receded and prey became scarce in the valleys, bears and other predators were forced to adapt, venturing into territories traditionally considered safe for humans. The Russian authorities warned climbers to take additional precautions and avoid camping in areas frequented by wildlife. Conservationists, meanwhile, highlighted the tragedy's broader implications. The grizzly's desperate behavior was a symptom of a larger ecological crisis threatening the animals and the humans who ventured into their shrinking habitats. The names Olga Kravtsova and Sergei Ivanov now resonate as symbols of the allure and the peril of mountaineering. Their story, though tragic, serves as a stark reminder of the thin line separating adventure from disaster in the wilderness. Ultimately, the tragedy underscored a sobering truth. Nature is neither cruel nor kind. It simply exists, indifferent to the fates of those who dare to tread its path. Olga and Sergei's final climb was not a failure, but a testament to their courage and determination. They faced the mountain and all it brought with unyielding resolve, leaving behind a legacy that would endure among the heights they sought to conquer. On a quiet June evening in 2020, three friends, Dan Mullins, Eric Carter, and Jeff Simmons, set out for a fishing trip along Bitterroot Creek in Idaho. The area was serene, a stretch of wilderness known for its beauty and abundance of trout. Towering pines lined the creek, their shadows stretching long as the sun dipped below the horizon. The friends, all experienced outdoors people, felt at ease in this rugged terrain. They had fished these waters many times before, sharing stories and laughter against the backdrop of nature's raw splendor. Yet, beneath the surface calm, there was an unsettling undercurrent. Eric had remarked earlier about the peculiar quietness of the forest. The usual chorus of birds and rustling underbrush seemed absent, replaced by an eerie stillness. While the three brushed it off as a trick of the mind, the feeling of being watched lingered like a shadow, growing heavier as the evening wore on. Unbeknownst to them, they were indeed being watched. From the dense tree line, a massive grizzly observed their every move. This bear wasn't an ordinary inhabitant of the forest. It was a rogue, an outlier in bear behavior, aggressive and territorial. Nearby, its den lay hidden, filled with animal remains that spoke of its violent dominance over this stretch of wilderness. The men were intruders to the grizzly, and the boundary they had unknowingly crossed was unforgivable. As dusk deepened into night, the friends prepared to pack up. The trout had been biting all day, and their coolers were nearly full. Eric decided to explore upstream for one last cast, leaving Dan and Jeff by the water's edge to secure their gear. The air was cooling rapidly, and the light was fading fast. Then, the silence broke, not with the gentle rustle of wind or the distant call of an owl, but with a sound that froze the blood in Dan and Jeff's veins. A low, guttural growl reverberated through the forest. Before they could react, the grizzly charged from the shadows, its massive frame moving with terrifying speed. Dan and Jeff had no time to run. The bear was on them in seconds, a blur of fur and fury. Its first swipe sent Jeff sprawling, his body slamming into the rocky creek bank. Dan turned to flee, but was brought down by a powerful lunge. The bear's jaws clamped around his leg, dragging him into the dirt. Eric, hearing the commotion, turned to see the chaos unfold. Without a second thought, he bolted upstream, his survival instincts overriding any urge to help. He later admitted the guilt of that decision would haunt him forever. The attack was brutal and unrelenting. Dan struggled fiercely, kicking and striking at the bear with everything he had, but his efforts were futile against the sheer power of the grizzly. Its claws tore through his clothing and flesh, and its teeth delivered crushing bites that left no chance of escape. Jeff, dazed and bleeding, tried to crawl away but drew the bear's attention once more. It turned on him, its growls echoing over the creek as it pounced. The force of its attack crushed his chest, silencing him instantly. The struggle lasted minutes, though it felt like an eternity. When the bear finally retreated, the clearing was silent, except for the creek's rushing water and the distant cry of a frightened Eric, still running. The grizzly, satisfied with its territorial fury, disappeared into the forest, leaving devastation in its wake. Authorities were alerted when Eric stumbled into a nearby campsite, hysterical and covered in scratches from his flight through the brush. Search and rescue teams arrived at the creek the next morning, finding the scene exactly as Eric described. Dan and Jeff's bodies bore the unmistakable signs of a grizzly attack: deep claw marks, broken bones, and evidence of a fierce struggle. Nearby, a trail of flattened grass and disturbed earth led to a den tucked into the hillside. Inside the den, investigators found a chilling sight: a cache of animal remains, some recent, others reduced to bones. This wasn't a bear defending its home, it was a predator asserting dominance over its territory, a behavior that had grown increasingly common in the area. The attack on Dan and Jeff marked the 5th fatal bear encounter in the region that summer, a grim statistic that fueled fear and outrage among locals. News of the attack spread quickly, sparking debates about the delicate balance between humans and wildlife. Bitterroot Creek, once a popular recreation spot, symbolized danger. Many questioned why the grizzly population in the area had grown so aggressive. Wildlife experts pointed to a combination of shrinking habitats, reduced food sources, and increased human encroachment. Others argued that the bears had become bolder after years of limited hunting regulations and minimal human intervention. A massive search was launched to locate the rogue bear. Helicopters scoured the forest, and armed rangers patrolled the area, determined to prevent another tragedy. Traps baited with fresh meat were set along the creek and nearby valleys, but the bear proved elusive. Weeks turned into months, and the grizzly remained large, a ghost in the wilderness that kept the region on edge. For Eric, life would never be the same. Survivors of such attacks often carry physical and emotional scars that never fully heal. He rarely spoke of that night, the memories too painful to relive. Friends and family noticed his change. A once outgoing and adventurous man, now reserved and haunted. His survival felt like a cruel twist of fate, a burden he would carry for the rest of his life. The attack at Bitterroot Creek became a cautionary tale, a reminder of nature's unpredictability and the fine line between coexistence and conflict. Some locals stopped venturing into the woods, while others armed themselves, refusing to be caught off guard. Conservationists urged education and respect for wildlife, emphasizing that bears, though fearsome, are vital to the ecosystem. Yet the fear lingered, a shadow over the community. Years later, Bitterroot Creek remains a place of beauty and danger. The forest has reclaimed the site of the attack, and the grizzly, whether dead or still roaming, is a part of its story. For those who dare to visit, the lesson is clear. The wilderness is not ours to tame, and respect for its power is the price of entry. Dan and Jeff paid that price with their lives, a tragic reminder of what happens when the wild asserts itself against man's encroachment. On September 9th, 2023, 41-year-old veteran backpacker Sean Hayes set out on a solo trek through Wyoming's Wind River Range. Sean was a seasoned adventurer who had spent years exploring some of the most remote and challenging trails across North America. Known among his friends for his meticulous preparation and love for nature, Sean often sought solitude in the wilderness to reconnect with himself and the environment. His experience and careful planning had earned him respect within the hiking community. Sean had spent months preparing for this particular journey. With its jagged peaks, alpine lakes, and rugged beauty, the Wind River Range was one of the most challenging terrains he had ever attempted. He meticulously planned his route, packed enough supplies for a week, and informed close friends of his itinerary. With a durable pack, trekking poles, and survival gear, Sean felt ready to tackle the adventure. The first 2 days of his hike went smoothly. Sean navigated the winding trails, camped near pristine lakes, and marveled at the untouched wilderness around him. The weather was ideal, with clear skies and crisp air. As an experienced outdoorsman, he kept his senses alert, aware of the dangers of trekking in bear country. He carried bear spray, stored his food properly, and followed all the recommended precautions. On the morning of the 3rd day, Sean entered a dense forest near a berry thicket. The area was quiet except for the rustling of leaves and the occasional bird call. As Sean rounded a bend in the trail, he suddenly froze. A massive grizzly bear and her cubs were feeding on berries ahead of him. His heart raced as he realized the danger he was in. Grizzlies fiercely protect their young, and Sean knows he has to act carefully to avoid provoking the animal. Slowly, Sean began to back away, keeping his eyes on the bear without direct eye contact. He held his trekking poles firmly, ready to use them if needed. The bear, sensing a threat to her cubs, lifted her head and began to growl. Sean's cautious retreat was not enough to calm the animal. The bear charged instantly, closing the distance between them with terrifying speed. Sean tried to defend himself, using his trekking poles to create a barrier. The bear's immense power, however, was overwhelming. It struck him with a massive paw, knocking him off balance and tumbling down a rocky incline. Sean sustained serious injuries as he hit the jagged rocks below. Despite the pain, he tried to crawl away, hoping to distance himself from the bear. But the grizzly was relentless, turning its attention back to him as he struggled to move. As Sean lay at the bottom of the rocky incline, his body battered and bleeding, the grizzly bear charged again. The animal's powerful jaws clamped down on him, delivering another brutal attack. Sean suffered fatal injuries as the bear mauled him, leaving deep gashes across his torso and limbs. Despite his strength and experience, Sean could no longer fight back. His body was still, and the bear, sensing no further threat, retreated to her cubs near the berry thicket. The wilderness grew silent once more, the only sounds being the rustling of leaves and the occasional cry of a bird. Sean's backpack, torn and scattered, lay near his motionless body. The harsh reality of his final moments was a stark contrast to the beauty of the untouched landscape around him. Days passed before Sean's absence was noticed. His friends raised the alarm when he failed to check in as planned. Search and rescue teams were dispatched to the Wind River Range, their mission complicated by the rugged terrain and expansive wilderness. Experienced trackers and volunteers worked tirelessly, covering miles of trails and scanning the remote areas using drones. It took nearly 3 days before a search team encountered signs of Sean's struggle. His trekking poles, broken and bloodied, were found near the rocky slope where he had tried to defend himself. Following the disturbed earth and torn gear trail, they discovered his remains. Sean's body showed clear evidence of a fierce struggle, with deep wounds from the bear's claws and bites. The scene was both tragic and haunting, a stark reminder of the unforgiving power of nature. The news of Sean's death spread quickly, shaking the hiking and outdoor communities. Sean was a respected and admired adventurer, known for his careful preparation and love of the wild. His loss sparked conversations about the risks of solo travel in bear country and the importance of preparedness, even for seasoned backpackers. Wildlife experts emphasize the need to respect grizzly habitats, especially during sensitive times like late summer, when bears are focused on feeding. Sean's family and friends mourned his passing, remembering him as a man who lived fully and embraced the challenges of the natural world. They honored his memory by supporting organizations promoting wilderness, safety, and education. His tragic encounter was a powerful reminder of the delicate balance between humans and wildlife in shared spaces. On July 17, 2023, Greg and Laura Thompson, newlyweds from Denver, Colorado, embarked on a much-anticipated camping trip to a national park in the northwest corner of Wyoming. The couple had always shared a passion for the outdoors, often spending their weekends hiking or camping in Colorado's mountainous regions. They decided to visit the national park for their honeymoon, a place they had both dreamed of exploring. The trip was meant to escape city life's bustle and a chance to connect with nature. Greg, 29, worked as a software engineer, while Laura, 27, was a middle school teacher. Both loved the simplicity of camping, falling asleep under the stars and waking to the sounds of the wilderness. They had spent weeks planning this trip, ensuring they had all the necessary gear, including a sturdy tent, cooking supplies, and bear spray. Their campsite was located in a designated area near Madison Junction, a popular spot known for its proximity to wildlife and scenic beauty. The first day of their trip was everything they had hoped for. They hiked along the Madison River, spotting bison in the distance and marveling at the park's geothermal features. That evening, they cooked dinner over a campfire and shared stories about their plans. As night fell, they carefully packed away their food and secured it in a bear-proof cooler, following the park's strict guidelines to minimize the risk of attracting wildlife. The peacefulness of the night was shattered in the early hours of the morning. Greg and Laura were jolted awake by rustling near their campsite. At first, Greg thought it might be the wind, but the noises grew louder and more distinct. Peering out of their tent, they saw a large bear rummaging through their cooler, its powerful claws tearing at the lid. Despite their efforts to store the food properly, the bear had been drawn to their campsite, likely driven by hunger. Greg and Laura quickly realized the seriousness of the situation. They shouted and banged on nearby objects, hoping to scare the bear away. However, their attempts only seemed to agitate the animal further. The bear turned its attention to the tent, its massive frame casting a shadow in the dim light. With a sudden lunge, it tore through the fabric, its claws ripping a gaping hole. Greg tried to shield Laura inside the tent as the bear charged at him. The bear's claws slashed Greg's arm and shoulder, leaving deep wounds that bled profusely. Laura reached for the bear spray as the chaos unfolded, her hands trembling. She aimed the spray at the bear with a determined burst, forcing it to retreat momentarily. The animal growled and backed away, but not before biting Laura's leg. The bite left a severe puncture wound, causing her immense pain as she struggled to stand. Despite their injuries, the couple managed to crawl out of the tent and move toward the edge of the campsite, where they hoped to find safety. Hearing the commotion, nearby campers rushed to help. Their shouts and flashlights finally drove the bear away into the woods. Greg and Laura, weak and shaken, waited as one of the campers called for assistance. Greg and Laura sat on the edge of their campsite, their breaths shallow and labored as they clung to each other for support. The pain from their injuries was becoming unbearable, but they knew they had to stay alert. Greg's wounds on his arm and shoulder continued to bleed heavily, while Laura's leg, bitten deeply, was swollen and throbbing. The nearby campers, who had come to their aid, stayed close, offering comfort and helping them stay calm while they awaited rescue. It wasn't long before the sound of a ranger's vehicle broke through the early morning stillness. The rangers, experienced in handling such emergencies, arrived with medical kits and weapons in case the bear returned. They immediately assessed Greg and Laura's injuries, applying pressure to Greg's wounds to slow the bleeding and wrapping Laura's leg to prevent further blood loss. The couple was then helped into the vehicle, and the rangers transported them to the nearest medical facility within the park. As the vehicle left the campsite, the rangers began tracking the bear. The bear appeared starving and desperate based on Greg and Laura's description and the evidence left behind. This behavior, though not uncommon in late summer when food sources become scarce, highlighted the dangers of human-wildlife interactions in areas like the national park in the northwest corner of Wyoming. The bear had likely been drawn to the campsite by the faint scent of food, despite the couple's efforts to store their supplies properly. At the medical facility, Greg and Laura were treated for their injuries. Greg required several stitches for the deep lacerations on his arm and shoulder, while Laura's leg wound necessitated cleaning and additional sutures. Both were placed under observation to ensure no infections or complications from their injuries. The medical staff commended Laura for her quick thinking and use of bear spray, which likely saved both their lives. Meanwhile, the rangers tracked and located the bear later that day. After confirming its identity through tracks and signs near the campsite, they made the difficult decision to euthanize it. Wildlife experts explained that the bear's behavior was consistent with desperation rather than aggression due to dwindling food sources in its natural habitat. Though necessary to prevent further incidents, this decision sparked debate among park visitors and conservationists. News of the attack spread quickly, drawing attention to the challenges of managing human-wildlife interactions in national parks. Some visitors criticized the couple, questioning whether they had taken every precaution. Others defended them, pointing out that they had followed all recommended guidelines and that the incident was an unfortunate reminder of the risks of visiting such wilderness areas. For Greg and Laura, the experience left physical and emotional scars. They spent weeks recovering from their injuries, attending physical therapy sessions, and learning to cope with the trauma of the attack. Despite the ordeal, they remained grateful to have survived and expressed gratitude to the rangers and campers who had come to their aid. The couple also became advocates for wildlife safety, sharing their stories to educate others about the importance of being prepared and respecting nature. National park officials implemented stricter measures to minimize such encounters in the following months. Campsites were inspected more rigorously, and visitors had to attend mandatory safety briefings before camping in bear-prone areas. Inspired by Greg and Laura's ordeal, these changes aimed to protect visitors and wildlife, fostering a safer coexistence. On September 10, 2023, 4 college friends from Seattle, Washington, set out on a hunting trip deep in Alaska's remote wilderness. The group included Ryan Carter, 24, a biology major fascinated by studying wildlife; Emily Harper, 23, an environmental science student and outdoor enthusiast; Tyler Morgan, 25, a seasoned hunter with experience in remote terrains; and Jason Lee, 22, a computer science student, eager for his first outdoor adventure. Their shared love for the outdoors and years of friendship at the University of Washington brought them together for this journey. Their destination was a secluded area near a national park and preserve in southwest Alaska, known for its dense forests, rugged landscapes, and rich wildlife. The group had spent weeks planning this trip, gathering essential supplies such as tents, rifles, first aid kits, and flares. They hoped to hunt small game, explore the untouched terrain, and disconnect from their busy academic lives. Their campsite was carefully chosen, a flat clearing surrounded by towering spruce trees, with a stream nearby providing fresh water. The first day of their trip went smoothly. They hiked through dense trails, spotting moose tracks and eagles soaring above. Tyler shared his hunting knowledge with Jason, who was eager to learn. By evening, they had set up camp, lighting a small fire to keep warm as the temperature dropped. Laughter and stories filled the air as they cooked dinner and marveled at the breathtaking Alaskan night sky. As the night deepened, the forest around them grew eerily quiet, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. Tired from the day's adventures, the group retreated to their tents. Tyler and Jason shared one tent, while Ryan and Emily occupied the other. The fire had burned low, its embers glowing faintly in the darkness. Suddenly, a loud snarl shattered the silence. Ryan was the first to stir, and his instincts told him something was wrong. Before he could react, a massive grizzly bear emerged from the shadows, drawn by the scent of their food. The bear roared, charging toward the campsite and clawing at their gear. It tore into the tents within seconds, shredding the fabric with powerful claws. Emily was caught in the bear's path, suffering a deep laceration to her shoulder as the animal struck her while tearing through her tent. Just inches away, Ryan scrambled to pull her out of harm's way as Tyler and Jason awoke to the chaos. The group quickly grabbed their rifles, fumbling in the darkness to load them. Tyler managed to fire a warning shot into the air, causing the bear to retreat momentarily into the shadows. The attack left the group shaken, and Emily's condition was critical. Her shoulder bled heavily, and the pain was intense, making it difficult for her to move. The bear lingered nearby, its growls echoing through the forest as the friends tried to regroup. They knew they were miles from safety, with no means to call for help and a dangerous predator stalking them. The situation grew dire as the reality of their isolation set in. Tyler and Ryan quickly created a makeshift stretcher from branches and their tent fabric to carry Emily. Jason, though inexperienced, kept a watchful eye on the tree line, ready to fire if the bear returned. The group's bond was tested as fear and exhaustion took hold, but their determination to survive kept them moving. The group knew they had no choice but to leave the campsite immediately. With the bear still nearby, every second felt like a race against time. Tyler and Ryan carefully placed Emily onto the makeshift stretcher, securing her tightly with straps to prevent further injury. Emily's bleeding shoulder continued to soak through the bandages, and her pale face revealed the immense pain she was enduring. Jason carried the flares, his hands trembling as he clutched one in readiness. As they began their trek, the darkness of the Alaskan wilderness enveloped them. The forest seemed alive with sounds, every rustle and snap heightening their sense of vulnerability. Tyler took the lead, his rifle raised and his eyes scanning the dense undergrowth for signs of movement. Ryan stayed close to Emily, occasionally checking her condition, while Jason brought up the rear, watching for any sign of the bear. Hours passed, and the group made slow progress through the uneven terrain. The weight of the stretcher and the stress of the situation took a toll on their energy, but they pushed forward, driven by the need to save Emily. Snapping branches and labored breaths echoed through the forest despite their efforts to remain silent. Behind them, the occasional low growl reminded them that the bear was still following. At one point, the bear appeared again, its dark shape emerging from the shadows. Jason quickly ignited a flare, the bright light startling the animal and forcing it to retreat once more. The group used the opportunity to increase their pace, but the constant threat of another attack left them on edge. The journey to their vehicle seemed endless. Emily's condition worsened as her breathing grew shallow, and her consciousness faded in and out. Tyler and Ryan switched places frequently to share the burden of carrying her, their muscles aching from the effort. Jason's inexperience showed as he stumbled often, but his determination to protect his friends kept him moving. As dawn broke, the faint outline of their vehicle came into view. Relief washed over them, but their ordeal was not yet over. They hurriedly loaded Emily into the back seat, using whatever supplies they had left to stabilize her for the drive. Tyler took the wheel, his hands steady despite the exhaustion, while Ryan and Jason stayed close to Emily, keeping her awake and monitoring her condition. The drive to the nearest hospital was grueling. with rough roads and the constant fear that Emily might not make it. Her shoulder injury had caused significant blood loss, and her condition was critical by the time they arrived. Medical staff rushed her into surgery, working tirelessly to save her life. In the days that followed, the group reflected on their experience. Emily survived the attack, but her recovery was slow and painful. The physical scars were a reminder of the ordeal, but the emotional impact lingered longer. Tyler, Ryan, and Jason struggled with guilt and helplessness, though they knew they had done everything possible to protect their friend. The incident sparked discussions among their friends and family about the risks of remote adventures. For Tyler, the experience reinforced the importance of preparation and the unpredictable nature of the wilderness. Jason, despite his lack of knowledge, felt a newfound respect for the outdoors and the dangers it could hold. Ryan, always passionate about wildlife, understood the bear's actions as instinctual, but carried a deeper appreciation for the fine line between human presence and nature. Once recovered, Emily joined her friends in sharing their story to raise awareness about safety in the wild. They emphasized proper communication tools, better planning, and respect for wildlife. Their ordeal became a tale of survival, resilience, and the unbreakable bond of friendship forged in the face of danger. Gideon Osman was no stranger to solitude. At 51, he had spent most of his life as a fisherman in rural Canada, thriving in the stillness of the wilderness. A tall, wiry man, with calloused hands and a weathered face, Gideon was known for his quiet determination and deep connection to the river. He spent his days casting lines and repairing nets, finding peace in the rhythm of his work. That morning, Gideon set out to one of his favorite fishing spots, a secluded lake deep within the forest. It was a place where time seemed to stand still, the water so still it mirrored the sky. As he cast his line into the lake, the faint hum of insects and the occasional splash of fish were the only sounds that accompanied him. Unbeknownst to Gideon, he was not alone. A large brown bear had been moving through the area, its powerful frame gliding silently through the dense undergrowth. Drawn by the faint scent of fish and the unfamiliar presence of a human, the bear paused just inside the tree line, watching. Gideon reeled in his line, muttering about the day's slow catch. He adjusted his stance, turning slightly, and froze. From the corner of his eye, he saw movement among the trees. His stomach knotted as the bear emerged, its massive body moving with an unsettling grace. The bear locked eyes with him, its posture shifting from cautious curiosity to sudden aggression. Without warning, it charged. Gideon knew to fear grizzlies. He still bore the marks of an unfortunate encounter with one of these creatures when he was young. Still, he found the bear's speed shocking, its powerful legs eating up the distance between them in seconds. Its immense weight slammed into him, knocking him backward into the icy water. He gasped as the cold enveloped him, disorienting and numbing. In a matter of seconds, the bear attacked. Its jaws clamped onto Gideon's leg, the sharp teeth slicing through muscle and tendon. Pain seared through him as the bear dragged him toward the shore, its claws digging into the rocky lakebed for traction. Gideon thrashed, his instincts screaming at him to fight back, to survive. His hand grasped wildly, finding the wooden paddle he had leaned against a rock earlier. He swung the paddle at the bear's head with every ounce of strength he could muster. The blow landed with a dull thud, but it only seemed to enrage the animal. The bear growled, its fury strong enough to make the earth tremble, and swiped at the paddle with its massive paw. The wood splintered under the force, the pieces scattering into the water. Gideon was completely defenseless. The bear reared up, its claws slashing downward. Gideon raised his arms instinctively, and the claws tore through his forearms, leaving deep gashes that sent fresh waves of agony coursing through him. Blood mixed with the lake water, the metallic tang of it filling his senses. Ever since that incident years ago, Gideon hated the sight of his blood. A wave of nausea washed over him, making the situation even more desperate. Gideon's screams echoed across the lake, piercing and desperate. The bear bit into his shoulder, shaking its head violently as if to assert dominance. The pain was unbearable, But adrenaline and desperation kept Gideon conscious. He tried to twist free, his hands clawing at the rocks beneath him, but the bear's grip was unyielding. On the far side of the lake, a group of fishermen heard the commotion. They grabbed what they could, flares, bear spray, and paddles, and raced toward the source of the screams. They knew one of their own was in trouble. Who else would venture to that secluded spot? Nothing could stop the bear as it dragged Gideon further out of the water and onto the shore. It swiped at his torso, ripping through his shirt and tearing layers and layers of flesh beneath. The world tilted. The once serene lake, now a chaotic blur of pain, terror, fur, and claws. The fishermen arrived, shouting and waving their arms to scare the bear. One lit a flare, the bright light and acrid smoke momentarily startling the animal. The bear hesitated, its head turning toward the newcomers. Seeing an opening, another fisherman deployed a canister of bear spray. The orange cloud engulfed the bear's face, and it roared, retreating a few steps. It swiped at the air, its eyes watering from the sting. The fisherman pressed forward, shouting louder and throwing rocks. But the bear wasn't done yet. The fisherman stood frozen in shock as the bear lunged at Gideon, clamping its powerful jaws around his neck. The sickening crunch echoed through the air, silencing the chaos instantly. Then, satisfied, the bear released him and turned toward the forest. Its retreat was slow and deliberate, each heavy step a chilling reminder that it left only on its terms, its dominance etched into the shaken witnesses' minds. The fisherman rushed to Gideon, who was miraculously still alive. His body was a mess of torn flesh and blood-soaked clothing. They worked quickly to stem the bleeding, using their shirts and belts as makeshift tourniquets. One ran to call for help, his phone trembling as he dialed. But the injury on his neck was another matter altogether. Gideon's breathing was shallow. Each inhale was a painful effort. The men did their best to keep him awake, speaking urgently to him and trying to reassure him. But the injuries were too severe. By the time rescue crews arrived, Gideon's body had gone still, his life slipping away in the wilderness he had cherished. The lake returned to its quiet state, the water undisturbed save for the ripples left by the commotion. The fishermen stood in somber silence, the weight of the attack hanging heavily in the air. Gideon Osman, a man who had spent his life finding peace in nature's embrace, had fallen victim to its raw and unforgiving power. On July 15, 2023, Sarah Jenkins and Mark Thompson embarked on a horseback riding trip through a national forest in western Wyoming. The couple, both in their late 20s, shared a deep love for the outdoors and often explored wilderness trails during their weekends. Sarah, an elementary school teacher, had grown up in Wyoming and spent much of her childhood horseback riding across the region's vast landscapes. Originally from Colorado, Mark worked as an environmental consultant and often accompanied Sarah on her adventures, learning to ride and appreciate the area's rugged beauty. This particular afternoon was idyllic. The sun shone brightly, and a gentle breeze rustled the trees as the couple guided their horses along a trail that meandered through the forest. They chose this path because it was known for its stunning views and occasional sightings of deer and elk. Sarah rode a chestnut mare named Bella, while Mark was on a sturdy black gelding named Rocky. The couple enjoyed the serenity of the forest, and the soft crunch of hooves on the trail added rhythm to their journey. As they rode deeper into the wilderness, the trail narrowed, flanked by dense undergrowth on either side. The couple chatted quietly, unaware they were venturing close to a grizzly bear's territory. The forest was alive with sounds, from birds chirping to the distant rustle of leaves, but neither Sarah nor Mark suspected any danger. As they rounded a bend in the trail, Bella suddenly stopped, her ears pricked forward. Sensing the horse's unease, Sarah tried to calm her, but a massive grizzly bear burst out of the underbrush before she could react. The bear, likely startled by the horses, stood on its hind legs, growling loudly. The sudden appearance of the predator sent both horses into a frenzy. The mare reared up before Sarah could steady Bella, throwing her off the saddle. Sarah landed hard on the rocky ground, bruising her side and scraping her arms. Mark managed to keep his seat on Rocky, but his heart raced as he watched the bear charge toward Sarah. Bella bolted into the trees, leaving Sarah vulnerable on the trail. The bear lunged at Sarah, its massive frame towering over her as she tried to scramble away. Its claws raked across her leg, leaving deep gashes as she screamed in pain. Desperate to protect her, Mark spurred Rocky forward, positioning the horse between Sarah and the bear. He waved his arms and shouted, trying to divert the bear's attention. The grizzly turned toward Mark, its growls echoing through the forest. Sensing the danger, Rocky stomped and snorted, but the bear remained undeterred. Mark grabbed a branch from the ground, waving it frantically to fend off the animal. The distraction gave Sarah enough time to crawl a few feet away, clutching her injured leg as blood seeped through her jeans. The bear swiped at Mark's horse, grazing Rocky's side with its claws. The gelding reared up, forcing the bear to back off momentarily. Mark took the opportunity to yell at Sarah to move further away. Her leg injury made it nearly impossible for her to stand, and she crawled slowly toward the cover of a fallen tree. The bear's attention shifted back to Sarah as it paced the trail, growling and sniffing the air. Mark knew he had to act quickly to keep the predator from attacking again. His mind raced as he prepared to risk everything to protect Sarah. Mark's adrenaline surged as the grizzly turned its focus back to Sarah, who was still struggling to move further away. Her leg injury, combined with her bruises, made her movements slow and excruciatingly painful. The bear growled loudly, inching closer, its heavy paws crunching against the gravel path. Mark knew he needed to act decisively. He urged Rocky forward again, positioning the horse between the bear and Sarah. The gelding's loud snorts and stomping hooves momentarily distracted the bear. Mark grabbed another sturdy branch from the ground and waved it aggressively, shouting to scare the predator. The bear paused, clearly agitated but momentarily unsure of its next move. Sarah, still clutching her bleeding leg, managed to drag herself behind the fallen tree for cover. The deep gashes on her leg continued to bleed heavily, soaking her jeans and making her dizzy from blood loss. She fought to stay conscious, knowing Mark was risking his life to protect her. The bear finally retreated into the underbrush, but Mark knew it wasn't gone for good. He quickly dismounted Rocky and rushed to Sarah's side. Surveying her injuries, he realized the situation was critical. Her leg wounds were severe, and her pale complexion showed signs of shock. He tore strips of fabric from his shirt to create a makeshift bandage, tying it tightly around her leg to slow the bleeding. Mark gently helped Sarah onto his horse, ensuring she was securely seated in the saddle. Although Rocky had been injured earlier, the resilient horse stood steady, almost as if he understood the moment's gravity. With reins in hand, Mark led them into the forest, his senses on high alert for any sign of danger. Every rustling leaf and snapping twig sent a jolt of adrenaline through him, but he kept moving forward, resolute in their mission to reach safety before the bear could return. Mark noticed movement in the distance as they approached the main trail. The sounds of the commotion alerted a group of hikers who appeared. One of them carried a satellite phone and immediately called for help. Relief washed over Mark as the hikers assisted in keeping Sarah stable while they waited for the rescue team to arrive. When the helicopter finally landed in a clearing, paramedics rushed to Sarah's side. Her injuries required immediate attention, and she was airlifted to the nearest hospital. Mark stayed behind to ensure Rocky was safely cared for before being transported to reunite with Sarah. The following days were filled with recovery and reflection. Sarah underwent surgery to repair the damage to her leg, and doctors confirmed that she would need weeks of physical therapy. The scars on her leg would be a permanent reminder of the harrowing encounter. Despite the trauma, she remained optimistic, grateful to be alive, and deeply thankful for Mark's courage. Though physically unharmed, Mark struggled with the emotional toll of the incident. The image of the bear charging at Sarah haunted him, but he found solace in knowing he had done everything possible to protect her. Their bond grew stronger as they supported each other through the recovery process. The attack sparked widespread discussions in their community about the risks of outdoor activities in bear-populated areas. Local wildlife officials emphasized the importance of carrying bear spray, avoiding known bear territories, and staying vigilant during wilderness excursions. Sarah and Mark, now advocates for wilderness safety, shared their story to raise awareness about the dangers and unpredictability of wildlife encounters. While the scars of the attack remained, the couple found strength in their survival. The experience deepened their appreciation for life and each other, turning a near tragedy into a powerful story of resilience and love. On July 15, 2023, David and Rachel Parker, a couple from Denver, Colorado, set out on what they thought would be a memorable summer adventure in a national park in northwestern Montana. David, 39, was a history professor with a passion for nature photography, and Rachel, 37, was an elementary school teacher who loved hiking and exploring new trails. They had been married for 10 years and shared a deep appreciation for the outdoors. This trip was their way of celebrating their anniversary while reconnecting with the natural world. The couple meticulously planned their hike, choosing a popular trail for its scenic views and wildlife. David carried a high-end camera, eager to capture the park's rugged beauty, while Rachel packed snacks and water to keep them fueled for the journey. Both wore sturdy hiking boots and lightweight backpacks filled with essentials. The morning was perfect. Clear skies, a gentle breeze, and birds chirping in the distance. They felt at ease, unaware of the danger that awaited them. The trail wound through dense forests and open meadows, offering breathtaking views of snow-capped peaks and crystal-clear lakes. Rachel led the way, pointing out wildflowers and occasionally admiring the scenery. David often stopped to take pictures, falling behind as he adjusted his camera settings to capture the perfect shot. The couple's laughter and conversation filled the air, a stark contrast to the stillness of the wilderness. As they ventured deeper into the park, they came across a secluded area near a stream shaded by towering pines. It was the ideal spot for a quick break, and David suggested taking some photos by the water. Rachel agreed, and they stepped off the main trail, unaware they were entering Grizzly territory. David set up his camera on a tripod, while Rachel explored the surrounding area, marveling at the beauty of the untouched landscape. The tranquility was shattered when a rustling sound came from the underbrush. Rachel froze, her heart racing, as she spotted a massive grizzly bear emerging from the thicket. Startled by their presence, the bear stood on its hind legs, its dark eyes locking onto the couple. David quickly grabbed his camera, thinking he could capture a rare wildlife moment, but the bear's growl sent a chilling warning. Rachel instinctively backed away, urging David to do the same, but David focused on adjusting his lens and moved closer to get a better angle. The bear's growl grew louder, and within seconds it charged. David barely had time to react as the bear swiftly closed the distance. The bear knocked him to the ground, its powerful claws tearing into his back, causing deep lacerations. Rachel screamed, dropping her backpack as she ran toward the trail, desperate to find help. Rachel's footsteps echoed in her ears as she sprinted toward the trail, her mind racing with fear and panic. Behind her, she could still hear the growls and roars of the bear, mixed with David's cries of pain. She glanced back briefly, only to see the massive creature looming over David, who was struggling beneath its weight. The bear's claws continued to rake across his back and arms, leaving deep wounds as he tried to shield himself. Desperate for help, Rachel pushed herself harder, her legs trembling from exhaustion and adrenaline. Rachel spotted a group of hikers a few hundred yards down the trail. She waved her arms, shouting to get their attention. The group, alarmed by her frantic state, immediately grabbed their bear spray and ran toward the sounds of the attack. Rachel collapsed onto the ground, gasping for breath as she pointed them in the right direction. The hikers arrived just as the bear was preparing to strike again. They quickly formed a line, aiming their bear spray at the animal. The first burst of the spray was missed due to the wind, but the second shot hit the bear directly in the face. Stunned and disoriented, the bear growled one final time before retreating into the dense forest. The hikers cautiously approached David, who lay motionless on the ground. David was alive but severely injured. His back and arms were covered in deep lacerations, and his breathing was shallow from the trauma. One of the hikers, a nurse, immediately began administering first aid, using a clean shirt to apply pressure to the wounds and slow the bleeding. Another hiker used their satellite phone to call for emergency assistance. Within 30 minutes, a rescue helicopter arrived, guided by the group's bright clothing and frantic waving. Paramedics carefully lifted David onto a stretcher and secured him in the helicopter. Rachel climbed aboard, holding David's hand as they were airlifted to the nearest hospital. Doctors at the hospital worked tirelessly to stabilize David. He required surgery to repair torn muscles and deep wounds, and he lost a significant amount of blood. Despite the severity of his injuries, David was declared stable after several hours in the operating room. The incident sparked widespread attention, with park officials stating the importance of staying on marked trails and carrying proper safety equipment. New policies were implemented to limit access to areas with high bear activity, and educational programs were launched to teach visitors how to navigate the wilderness safely. For David and Rachel, the attack was a life-altering event. David faced a long recovery process, both physically and emotionally, but he remained grateful to be alive. Rachel, who had acted swiftly to get help, became an advocate for wildlife safety, sharing their story to raise awareness. The couple, though shaken, found strength in each other as they began to heal from the traumatic experience. On September 18th, 2023, Eric Miller, a 35-year-old environmentalist from Boulder, Colorado, embarked on a solo hike in the breathtaking Rocky Mountains. Eric was no stranger to the outdoors. A passionate advocate for conservation, he spent his weekends exploring trails, collecting data for local wildlife studies, and promoting ecotourism in his community. His dedication to preserving nature earned him respect among environmental groups, but he preferred solitude, finding peace in the unspoiled wilderness. This particular hike was intended to be a personal retreat. Eric had recently completed a major project on sustainable forestry and wanted to reconnect with the environment he worked so hard to protect. Equipped with his whistle, first aid kit, and bear spray, Eric felt prepared for anything the rugged terrain might throw at him. He chose a remote trail near Estes Park, known for its scenic views and abundant wildlife, including deer, elk, and the occasional black or grizzly bear. The morning was crisp and clear as Eric set off, his boots crunching against the gravel path. Towering pines lined the trail, their needles glistening with dew. Eric paused frequently to admire the sights, jotting notes in his field journal about the flora and fauna he encountered. He was thrilled to spot a family of marmots basking on a sunlit rock. As the hours passed, he climbed higher, the air thinning and the views growing more spectacular. Around noon, Eric reached a narrow section of the trail bordered on one side by a steep incline and on the other by dense undergrowth. Here, he spotted fresh bear tracks in the dirt. His heart quickened, but he reminded himself to stay calm. Bears were common in the Rockies and encounters were usually harmless if proper precautions were taken. He continued walking, his senses heightened. Suddenly, the undergrowth rustled. A large grizzly bear emerged, its dark eyes locking onto Eric. Startled, the bear stood on its hind legs, towering over him. Eric froze, recalling the advice he had given others. Avoid sudden movements and don't run. Slowly, he backed away, hoping to de-escalate the situation. But the bear, feeling threatened, let out a roar and charged. Eric's instincts kicked in. He turned and scrambled toward a nearby tree, hoping to climb to safety. His boots slipped on the loose soil, and before he could gain much height, the bear swiped at him with its powerful claws. Eric was knocked to the ground, the force leaving him dazed as the bear lunged again, raking its claws across his back and legs. Pain shot through his body as he tried to crawl away, his breathing shallow and rapid. Eric reached for the whistle hanging from his backpack strap despite his injuries. He blew it repeatedly, the piercing sound cutting through the forest. The bear hesitated, distracted by the noise, giving Eric a brief moment to assess his situation. He was bleeding heavily, but his mind raced with survival strategies. As the bear growled and circled back, Eric continued to blow the whistle, praying someone would hear him. The wilderness around him felt vast and isolating, the trees seeming to close in as the bear prepared for another attack. Eric's whistle continued to echo through the forest as he clutched his bleeding wounds, struggling to remain conscious. The bear, momentarily distracted, growled and stepped back, its ears twitching as it scanned the surroundings. Eric knew this was his only chance. He crawled toward the nearest tree trunk, each movement sending searing pain through his back and legs. Blood seeped from the deep gashes along his legs and back, leaving a dark trail on the forest floor. As the bear lowered its head to charge again, loud shouts and the clatter of approaching footsteps broke through the tension. A group of nearby hikers, alerted by Eric's whistle, appeared on the trail, armed with sticks and making as much noise as possible. The bear paused, clearly uneasy about the growing commotion. The hikers banged their equipment together and yelled, forcing the animal to retreat further into the underbrush. After a few tense moments, it disappeared entirely into the dense forest. Relief swept over the hikers as they rushed to Eric's side. His shirt was torn, revealing the jagged wounds on his back, and his legs were swollen and bruised from the mauling. One of the hikers, a former medic, quickly assessed his injuries, using a spare shirt to apply pressure to the worst of the bleeding. Another hiker radioed for help using an emergency transceiver, providing their location to rescue teams. Eric's breathing was shallow, but he remained conscious, his determination to survive evident despite the pain. The hikers worked together to make him comfortable while waiting for rescue. After nearly an hour, The sound of helicopter blades cutting through the air signaled the arrival of the rescue team. A paramedic was lowered to the ground, stabilizing Eric and preparing him for airlift. He was pale and weak from blood loss, but his vital signs were stable enough for transport. The team carefully secured him onto a stretcher and hoisted him into the helicopter. Eric was flown to a hospital in Denver, where a team of surgeons worked to repair the damage caused by the attack. Doctors closed multiple deep wounds on his back and legs and treated him for severe blood loss. The road to recovery was long and challenging. Physical therapy became a crucial part of his rehabilitation, as the bear's claws had torn through muscle and tissue, leaving him with limited mobility for months. Despite the trauma, Eric's spirit remained unbroken. From his hospital bed, he began drafting plans to raise awareness about bear safety in hiking areas. He collaborated with local authorities to develop educational programs for hikers, emphasizing the importance of proper precautions and respecting wildlife. The incident sparked significant changes in the park's safety policies. Rangers installed more warning signs on trails known for bear activity and increased patrols during peak hiking seasons. They also held workshops on using bear spray and understanding animal behavior to prevent similar encounters. Eric's story became a symbol of resilience and a reminder of nature's unpredictability. Though scarred physically and emotionally, he chose to use his experience to educate others, ensuring that his ordeal would serve a greater purpose. The hikers who saved him remained in touch, their bond forged by the harrowing events of that day. Together, they shared their story, inspiring countless others to approach the wilderness cautiously and respectfully. In September 2020, 10 seasoned hikers embarked on an ambitious expedition through the dense, rugged forests near Siberia's Altai Mountains. Known for its pristine wilderness and unpredictable dangers, the Altai Range was both awe-inspiring and perilous, home to formidable wildlife, including the legendary Russian grizzly bear. Among the group were Ivan and Dmitry Petrov, brothers in their early 30s, eager to escape the monotony of city life and experience the raw, untamed landscape. They had trained for months and prepared for the harsh conditions, but nothing could have prepared them for the unfolding horror. The morning was crisp, the sky pale blue, and the dense pine forest stretched endlessly, interrupted only by the occasional frozen stream. The hikers moved in single file along a narrow, winding trail. The air was thick with anticipation, and each step took them deeper into the wild heart of Siberia. Despite their excitement, there was an undercurrent of unease. The forest was eerily quiet, and the presence of predators like the Russian grizzly, a powerful and dangerous creature, was never far from their thoughts. As they trekked deeper into the woods, the trail narrowed further, and the dense canopy overhead blocked much of the sunlight. The forest floor was covered in a thick layer of frost, crunched under their boots with each step. Then they encountered something that would stop them dead in their tracks. Lying across the trail was a massive, motionless form. At first it seemed like just another fallen tree, but as they got closer, the unmistakable shape of a grizzly bear became apparent. Its fur was patchy, its body gaunt, and its ribs were visible beneath the coarse coat. The bear appeared lifeless, its head tilted unnaturally to one side, its eyes closed. The hikers hesitated, uncertain of what to do. Some wanted to turn back immediately, but others, driven by curiosity, urged caution and suggested they investigate further. Ivan, always the more daring of the brothers, decided to step closer, the others reluctantly following his lead. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the usual sounds of wildlife stilled in the presence of this enormous creature. Without warning, the bear's eyes snapped open, and with a deafening roar, it surged to life. The sound reverberated through the trees, shaking the very air. The massive bear lunged toward them with terrifying speed, its claws slashing through the air like a lethal weapon. Its roar echoed across the forest, shaking the ground beneath them as it moved with predatory ferocity, its emaciated form now a deadly force of nature. The group's initial shock quickly turned to chaos. The first hiker, closest to the bear, was struck by a swipe of the creature's massive paw, sending them crashing to the ground, blood spraying from the savage wound. Before anyone could react, the bear's jaws closed around the next victim, tearing them apart in seconds. Ivan and Dmitri watched in horror as two more hikers fell victim to the bear's lethal onslaught, their screams cutting through the trees before being abruptly silenced. Now gripped by sheer panic, the remaining hikers scattered in every direction. Desperate to protect his brother, Ivan grabbed Dmitri's arm and pulled him away, urging him to run. The forest exploded into a cacophony of noise, branches snapping, leaves rustling as they bolted through the undergrowth. Fueled by rage and hunger, the bear gave chase, its powerful legs thundering across the forest floor. Ivan dared not look back, though the sounds of the bear's pursuit grew louder with every passing second. The growls and roars of the bear echoed in their ears as they ran, and Ivan could hear the sickening crunch of bones as the beast tore into another hiker, their desperate cries quickly swallowed by the forest. In the distance, another hiker's screams faded into the woods, dragged away by the bear. The brothers pushed themselves beyond exhaustion, their bodies screaming for rest, but they dared not stop. They tore through the trees, leaping over fallen logs, their hearts pounding as they fought to escape the nightmare. They thought they might have lost the bear when they stumbled into a small clearing, the sounds of pursuit suddenly dissipating. But their respite was fleeting. The forest around them grew unnervingly still, too still, and they crouched low in a thicket, trembling from the terror that still gripped them. Hours passed in the cold, with the brothers hiding in the brush, afraid to move. 6 of the 10 hikers were already dead, and 2 more had been dragged away by the bear, leaving only Ivan and Dmitri to face the grim reality of their situation. The temperature continued to drop as nightfall descended, the Siberian cold creeping into their bones. They knew they couldn't remain hidden for long. The bear could return at any moment. With little choice, they decided to risk moving again, hoping to find their bearings and escape the forest. They used a flashlight to guide their way, its flickering beam cutting through the darkness as they retraced their steps. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves put their nerves on edge, but the forest had other plans. As they moved deeper into the woods, it became clear that the bear had not lost its scent. They heard the heavy thud of its paws in the distance, the sound drawing nearer each passing moment. Ivan and Dmitri's hopes of escaping grew more desperate. They were lost and weak, and their survival chances grew slimmer with every breath they took. The flashlight beam trembled in Ivan's hand as they tried to navigate, and an overwhelming sense of dread pushed them forward. At that moment, the bear struck again. From the shadows, it charged at them with terrifying speed. Ivan turned to shield Dmitri, but it was too late. The bear's claws raked across Ivan's side, and before Dmitri could react, the beast was upon him too. It tore into them with brutal efficiency, its claws raking through flesh, its powerful jaws closing around their limbs. They were helpless against the onslaught. The forest swallowed the sounds of the brothers' screams, their lives extinguished in an instant. The bear, its hunger sated for the moment, dragged their broken bodies into the darkness. When rescuers finally arrived, they found nothing but the blood-soaked ground, scattered remnants of clothing, and the unmistakable scent of death. The search continued for days, and it soon became clear that the bear responsible for the carnage was no ordinary grizzly. This rogue predator had learned to use cunning, feigning death to lure hikers in close. Its violence, driven by hunger and desperation, had turned it into a brutal killing machine. The bear was eventually tracked down and killed by a team of hunters, but the damage had already been done. The loss of Ivan and Dmitri, along with their friends, left an indelible mark on the survivors in the community. The attack ignited fierce debates about human-wildlife conflict, the dangers of encroaching on wildlife territories, and the consequences of a rapidly changing environment. For the family and friends of the hikers, especially Ivan and Dmitri's loved ones, the tragedy became a chilling reminder of the raw, unforgiving power of nature. In September 2017, Mark Evans, a seasoned wildlife photographer known for his breathtaking captures of nature's raw beauty, embarked on an ambitious journey to a national park in the Alaska Range's central area. The crisp autumn air and vibrant foliage surrounding the Brooks River made it the perfect setting to document the annual salmon run. This natural spectacle drew grizzly bears from far and wide, providing them with the sustenance they needed to survive the harsh Alaskan winter. For Mark, it was a dream assignment that promised to be both challenging and rewarding. Mark had spent years honing his craft and had developed a deep respect for the wild. His portfolio was filled with close-up shots of predators in action, wolves prowling under a full moon, eagles diving into icy waters, and even tigers in the dense jungles of India. However, the Alaskan grizzly bear, the apex predator of North America, remained a glaring omission. The Brooks River, renowned for its high concentration of bears during salmon season, was the ideal place to change that. With his high-end DSLR, telephoto lenses, and an array of camping gear, Mark set out to capture the elusive images that had eluded him for years. The first few days were idyllic. Mark maintained a respectful distance from the bears, often using his long lens to observe their behavior without intruding. He documented their fishing techniques, territorial squabbles, and even tender moments between mothers and cubs. Mark's camp was located a safe distance from the riverbank, tucked into the dense brush where he believed he could remain undetected by the wildlife. He adhered to the park's guidelines, keeping food sealed, avoiding loud noises, and steering clear of known bear trails. By the fourth day, Mark had accumulated hundreds of stunning photographs, but he wanted more. A definitive shot of a grizzly in the throes of the salmon hunt, framed by the shimmering waters of the Brooks River. Early that morning, he spotted a colossal male bear, its fur damp and glistening as it feasted on a pile of freshly caught salmon. The bear was massive, likely weighing close to 1,200 pounds, with a hump of muscle over its shoulders and claws that curved like scythes. This was the image Mark had been waiting for. He set up his tripod on a ridge that provided a clear view of the river below. From his vantage point, he estimated that he was at least 200 yards away, well beyond the park's recommended distance of 100 yards. Confident in his positioning and the bear's apparent focus on its meal, Mark began snapping photos. What he didn't realize, however, was that a subtle change in the wind had carried his scent directly toward the bear. The grizzly paused mid-bite, lifting its head and sniffing the air. Its ears pivoted forward, and its black eyes scanned the terrain. Mark continued to photograph, captivated by the bear's imposing stature and unaware of the growing tension in its movements. The bear took a few tentative steps away from the river, still testing the air. Then, as if something clicked in its primal instincts, it turned toward the ridge and moved deliberately in Mark's direction. Mark finally noticed the bear's behavior shift when it was halfway up the slope. Alarm bells rang in his mind, but he tried to stay calm. He knew that sudden movements could provoke a charge, and the ridge provided no immediate escape route. He grabbed his bear spray, his last line of defense, but the massive predator showed no signs of stopping. Within seconds, the slow approach turned into a full-speed charge. The grizzly moved with terrifying speed, closing the distance in an instant. Mark barely had time to react. He sprayed a burst of bear deterrent into the air, but the wind worked against him, dispersing it away from the bear. The grizzly was undeterred, its sheer bulk crashing through shrubs and loose rocks as it bore down on him. The bear struck Mark with a force that knocked him off his feet and sent his camera equipment flying. Its initial swipe shattered his arm, rendering him defenseless. Pain shot through his body as the bear's claws raked across his torso, tearing through flesh and muscle. Despite the agony, Mark's instincts as a photographer lingered. He thought fleetingly of the memory card in his camera, filled with images he would never get to share. The attack was brutal and unrelenting. The bear's immense strength and predatory instincts left no room for escape. It mauled Mark with primal fury, driven not by hunger but curiosity, territoriality, and perhaps an association of humans with food. A tragic consequence of illegal feeding incidents in the park. When the bear finally retreated, leaving Mark bloodied and motionless on the ridge, the surrounding wilderness fell eerily silent. His camera lay a few feet away, its lens cracked but still intact. The memory card within it would later reveal the final moments leading up to the attack. The bear's slow, calculated approach, and Mark's unwavering focus on his craft until it was too late. It wasn't until 2 days later that park rangers discovered Mark's body. A routine patrol team noticed signs of disturbance near the ridge, the trampled brush, the scattered equipment, and eventually, the grim evidence of the attack. They recovered his camera and reviewed the footage, piecing together the events that led to his tragic end. The incident sent shockwaves through the wildlife photography community and reignited debates about safety protocols in bear country. Experts speculated that the bear's aggressive behavior stemmed from its habituation to humans due to past feeding incidents. This association blurred the boundaries between humans and prey, creating a volatile situation that even the most experienced outdoorsman could not predict. Mark's death became a somber reminder of the risks inherent in capturing nature's untamed beauty. His photographs, later published posthumously, showcased the grizzly that took his life, a haunting testament to the fine line between awe and danger in the wild. Following the tragedy, the national park implemented stricter guidelines, including increased patrols to prevent illegal feeding and mandatory bear safety workshops for visitors. Mark's story became a cautionary tale for photographers and adventurers alike, emphasizing that no matter how skilled or prepared one might be, nature's unpredictability can never be fully tamed. In the end, Mark Evans left behind a legacy of stunning imagery and a powerful lesson. Respect the wild not as a conqueror but as a humbled observer, knowing that every step into its realm is both a privilege and a risk. Yukon Territory in Canada is a land of untamed beauty, a wilderness stretching beyond the horizon, with snow-capped peaks that meet dense forests, and nature reigns supreme. In October 2021, hunters Greg Palmer, Mike Larson, and Terry Scott embarked on a mission to trap wolves in this remote, unforgiving terrain. The men were seasoned outdoorsmen, familiar with the challenges of navigating the wild. Their purpose was clear: to manage the wolf population, an effort often contentious, but deemed necessary by many to preserve ecological balance. The air was crisp that morning, and the frost crunched under their boots as they trekked to check their traps. Nestled at the edge of a vast forest, their camp was a hub for their activities. Days were spent setting traps, tracking wolf packs, and maintaining their equipment. Nights brought stories shared over a roaring fire, the glow of lanterns flickering against the darkness. The Yukon wilderness was beautiful but merciless, and missteps could be fatal. On this particular day, the men stumbled upon a trap that had been sprung. To their surprise, it was not a wolf they had captured, but a massive grizzly bear. The animal, a formidable presence even in its injured state, lay tangled in the steel jaws of the trap. Its growls echoed through the trees, a low, guttural sound that sent shivers down their spines. Grizzlies are apex predators, towering over humans at full height and armed with razor-sharp claws and powerful muscles. They are known for their unpredictable nature, and even an injured bear poses a grave threat. Greg, Mike, and Terry understood this too well, but assumed the bear was immobilized. The bear's movements appeared sluggish, and the trap effectively restrained it. They approached cautiously, their rifles ready, intending to assess the situation and determine their next steps. They did not account for the sheer power of adrenaline surging through the grizzly's veins. As the hunters approached, the bear's growls grew louder. Its eyes locked onto its captors with a primal intensity. The beast surged forward instantly, ripping free from the trap that had injured but not subdued it. The men had no time to react. The attack was swift and ferocious. The bear lunged at Greg first, its massive claws slicing through him with terrifying ease. Terry, standing closest to Greg, attempted to raise his rifle but was overtaken before he could pull the trigger. Both men were killed almost instantly, their bodies left motionless on the forest floor. Standing a few paces away, Mike froze in shock as the scene unfolded. The bear, now bloodied and enraged, turned its attention toward him. Instinct took over, and he ran, adrenaline propelling him through the dense forest. Behind him, he could hear the bear crashing through the undergrowth, its pursuit relentless. Somehow, he managed to outpace the animal, stumbling back to the safety of their cabin. Once inside, Mike barricaded the door, his heart pounding as he tried to process the horror he had just witnessed. The small wooden cabin offered little comfort. He knew the bear was still out there, and its aggression had reached a dangerous peak. Hours passed in tense silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves outside. Unbeknownst to Mike, the grizzly was tracking his scent. Bears can detect prey from miles away with their keen sense of smell. The bloodshed earlier had only heightened the animal's fury, and it was determined to finish what it had started. Sometime after nightfall, the bear reached the cabin. Mike's worst fears were realized when he heard the unmistakable sound of heavy breathing outside the door. The beast began clawing at the walls, its strength threatening to tear the structure apart. Mike clutched his rifle, his hands trembling, but the thin wooden barriers of the cabin provided little defense against the bear's onslaught. The door gave way, and the grizzly charged inside. What followed was a desperate struggle for survival. Mike fired his rifle, the deafening sound echoing through the night, but the shots only seemed to enrage the animal further. The bear struck him with a force that sent him crashing against the wall. Despite his injuries, Mike fought back, using whatever he could to defend himself: a chair, a knife, even his bare hands. The struggle was brutal and chaotic, a testament to Mike's will to survive and the bear's unrelenting aggression. In the end, however, the grizzly overpowered him. When the beast finally retreated, Mike lay lifeless on the floor, the cabin a scene of destruction and carnage. The following morning, a group of campers passing through the area stumbled upon the aftermath. They found Greg and Terry's bodies near the trap and the ravaged cabin where Mike had made his last stand. Horrified, they alerted authorities, who arrived to assess the situation. Wildlife officers tracked the grizzly, eventually finding and euthanizing it. The bear's injuries from the trap undoubtedly contributed to its heightened aggression, a grim reminder of the risks of trapping large predators. The officers noted the bear's immense strength and resilience, even in its wounded state. The incident sent shockwaves through the hunting and wildlife management community. Ethical debates surrounding trapping practices were reignited, with critics arguing that such methods often lead to unintended and tragic consequences. Supporters of trapping emphasize the importance of predator control in maintaining ecological balance, but acknowledge the need for stricter guidelines to prevent incidents like this. The loss was immeasurable for the families of Greg, Terry, and Mike. The men had ventured into the wilderness to manage its predators, only to become victims of one. Their death served as a stark reminder of the inherent dangers of working in such an unforgiving environment. On July 14, 2023, the Carter family, Jim, Melissa, and their 15-year-old daughter Ellie, set out on a fishing trip in the remote waters of Alaska. The Carters were an adventurous family from Anchorage who enjoyed spending their weekends exploring Alaska's untamed wilderness. Jim, 47, was an experienced fisherman who had spent much of his life navigating Alaska's rivers and inlets. Melissa, 43, shared his love for the outdoors, and together they had passed on this passion to Ellie, who had grown up learning about wildlife and survival skills. The family's small motorboat, Summerwind, was their pride and joy. It had carried them on countless fishing trips, providing them opportunities to bond and create cherished memories. That summer morning, they had planned to venture to a secluded inlet known for its rich salmon runs. Jim had visited the inlet a few times before, and its isolation and beauty made it the perfect spot for a peaceful day on the water. The day began as planned. The weather was clear, the air crisp, and the water calm. The Carters laughed and talked as they cast their fishing lines, enjoying the moment's serenity. Ellie, who had recently developed a knack for fishing, was especially eager to catch her first big salmon. The family worked together to reel in a few good catches, their spirits high as they admired the stunning Alaskan wilderness. Unbeknownst to them, danger was nearby. A large grizzly bear was feasting on a salmon caught along the shore. The powerful predator was focused on its meal, but remained alert to its surroundings. As the Carters drifted closer to the shoreline, their boat's quiet motor and movement startled the bear. Feeling cornered and threatened, the grizzly began to show signs of aggression, pacing and growling as it watched the boat approach. The Carters noticed the bear and decided to back away, but it was too late. Sensing the intrusion, the grizzly charged into the water with alarming speed. The massive animal's presence was both terrifying and surreal. Before the Carters could react, the bear reached the boat, rising on its hind legs and swiping at the motor with claws. The force of the attack punctured the ship's side, causing it to rock violently. Melissa clung to Ellie as the boat began to take on water. Jim tried to stabilize the vessel, but the damage was severe. The bear struck the ship again, this time clawing through the hull. The Summerwind capsized, tossing the family into the icy waters. The cold was shocking, stealing their breath as they scrambled to stay afloat. As the bear retreated to the shore, the Carters struggled to gather their bearings in the freezing water. Hypothermia began to set in as they fought to survive. They managed to crawl onto a nearby rocky shoreline, shivering and terrified. The family's ordeal was far from over, as they realized they had no shelter, fire, or means to signal for help. The rocky shoreline offered little comfort to the Carters as they huddled together, their soaked clothes clinging to their skin and the cold biting through their bones. The icy Alaskan waters had already begun to take a toll on their bodies. Hypothermia was setting in, with their shivering becoming more intense. Melissa tried to keep Ellie close, using her body heat to warm her daughter, while Jim scanned the area for any sign of the bear. The grizzly had returned to the forest, but its proximity still posed a threat. The family knew they needed to move to higher ground. The shoreline was exposed, and the rising tide could trap them. Jim led the way, his legs weak and trembling from the cold, while Melissa and Ellie followed closely. The jagged rocks slowed their progress, and every step felt heavier as their strength faded. Despite the challenges, they pushed on, knowing that staying in one place could be even more dangerous. As dawn began to break, the faint light revealed the cliffs ahead. The Carters knew they had to climb to safety. The incline was slippery, and their frozen hands struggled to grip the rocks. Melissa stumbled, scraping her knee, but Jim helped her regain her footing. Ellie, though exhausted, refused to give up, determined to keep moving despite her fear and pain. Reaching the top of the cliff was a moment of relief. The higher ground offered protection, and they could see further into the inlet. Jim waved his jacket in the air, hoping to signal for help. Melissa joined him, and their combined efforts created a faint but visible movement against the backdrop of the forest. Hours passed, and their energy waned. The cold had drained them, and their hope was beginning to fade. Then, in the distance, the low hum of an engine broke the silence. A float plane appeared, its silver body glinting in the morning light. The Carters waved frantically, their movements fueled by a final surge of desperation. The pilot spotted them, circling once before descending to land on the water. The rescuers acted quickly, helping the family onto the plane and providing them with blankets and warm fluids. Although their bodies were weak, and Melissa showed signs of frostbite, they were alive. The flight back to the nearest town was quiet. The family was too drained to speak, but they were grateful to be safe. The Carters reflected on their narrow escape after the ordeal. The attack had destroyed their motorboat, and their close encounter with the grizzly bear reminded them of the unpredictable dangers of Alaska's wilderness. Despite the trauma, their bond as a family grew stronger. Jim vowed to prepare even better for future trips, ensuring they had the tools and knowledge to face whatever challenges might come. On September 8, 2023, Hank Doyle, a seasoned logger with over 2 decades of experience, ventured into the remote forests of Montana to inspect a new work site. Hank was well known in his small logging community in Missoula, Montana, for his hard work, practical skills, and deep respect for nature. At 48 years old, Hank had spent most of his life working in some of the state's densest and most rugged forests. His familiarity with the wild often made him the first choice for challenging assignments in isolated locations. Logging was more than just a job for Hank. It was a way of life that connected him to the environment while providing for his family. Despite the dangers, Hank embraced the challenges, carrying out his work precisely and carefully. He had an unshakable belief in his ability to handle any situation, even in the unpredictable wilderness. That belief, however, would be tragically tested on this fateful day. Hank set out early in the morning with his trusted chainsaw, a well-worn tool he relied on for every job. He planned to scout the work site and ensure the area was safe for the rest of the crew. The forest was thick with towering pines and undergrowth, and the air was crisp with the lingering scent of pine needles. As he walked deeper into the woods, Hank's boots crunched on the uneven forest floor, and his mind focused on assessing potential hazards like unstable trees and loose rocks. By mid-afternoon, Hank had reached a dense section of forest near a berry patch, a common wildlife area. As he moved closer, he unknowingly startled a grizzly bear feeding nearby. The bear, caught off guard, immediately sensed danger and turned its attention toward Hank. Grizzlies are known for their territorial behavior, and this one was no exception. Hank froze as the massive animal locked eyes with him. He understood the seriousness of the situation and began to back away slowly, avoiding sudden movements. Despite his efforts, the bear lowered its head and charged, closing the distance between them in seconds. With no firearm to defend himself, Hank gripped his chainsaw, the only tool at his disposal. He quickly started the engine, the roar of the machine cutting through the forest. As the grizzly closed in, Hank swung the chainsaw in defense, the blade catching the bear's shoulder and causing a deep wound. The bear, now injured, roared in pain and anger, its rage intensifying. Despite the injury, the grizzly's size and strength were overwhelming. It lunged at Hank, knocking him off his feet. Hank sustained fatal injuries as the bear overpowered him, its claws and teeth causing devastating wounds. The struggle left the forest floor littered with broken branches and torn ground as the bear finally retreated into the woods, its injured shoulder bleeding heavily. Hank's chainsaw, still running, lay beside him, a haunting symbol of his desperate fight. His body remained motionless, the dense forest falling silent once again. When Hank failed to return the next morning, his co-workers grew concerned. Hank was known for his punctuality and thoroughness, and his absence was out of character. By midday, a small search party was organized to trace his steps. The team, equipped with radios and basic gear, entered the forest following the path Hank had taken the previous day. As they approached the area near the berry patch, one of the searchers noticed the faint hum of an engine in the distance. It was Hank's chainsaw still running, the sound guiding them to the scene. What they found was devastating. Hank's body lay motionless on the forest floor, surrounded by evidence of a fierce struggle. His injuries were severe, with claw marks and deep wounds across his torso and arms. The ground was disturbed, bearing the signs of the grizzly's violent attack and Hank's desperate attempt to defend himself. The scene painted a grim picture of the encounter. The chainsaw, which had injured the bear, still lay beside Hank, a testament to his bravery and quick thinking. Despite his efforts, the grizzly's power and aggression were too much to overcome. The search party radioed for help, their voices heavy with sorrow as they relayed the news to the base. Authorities and wildlife rangers arrived later that afternoon to secure the area and investigate. The bear's tracks were visible, leading deeper into the forest. Based on the injuries and the scene, rangers concluded that Hank's defensive actions with the chainsaw likely saved future lives, forcing the bear to retreat before it could cause further harm. The rangers tracked the injured bear over the next 2 days. They found it near a stream, its wounded shoulder confirming that it was the same animal. To prevent further incidents, the bear was euthanized. This incident sparked discussions about human-wildlife conflicts and the responsibilities of working in bear country. It also highlighted the need for better safety protocols and equipment for those working in remote wilderness areas. Hank's death sent shockwaves through his community. He was remembered as a skilled professional who respected the forest and its inhabitants. His sacrifice became a somber reminder of nature's unpredictable dangers. Colleagues and friends shared stories of his dedication, describing him as a man who never hesitated to put himself in harm's way for the safety of others. In the following weeks, local organizations and forestry companies worked together to implement stronger safety measures for loggers in bear-prone regions. These included mandatory bear deterrent training and providing better protective equipment. Hank's story also became a cautionary tale for others, urging those venturing into the wild always to be prepared and vigilant. Hank's family took comfort in knowing his actions likely prevented others from encountering the same fate. Though his life ended tragically, his bravery and determination left a lasting impact, ensuring that his legacy would live on through improved safety practices and heightened awareness of the risks posed by the wilderness. The morning of August 5th, 2023, photographer Tara Nguyen, 31, embarked on an ambitious hike through a national park in northwestern Montana. Known for its towering peaks, lush valleys, and diverse wildlife, the park had always been on Tara's list of must-visit locations. As a professional wildlife photographer from Seattle, Washington, Tara specializes in capturing intimate moments of animals in their natural habitats. Her work often highlighted the delicate balance between humans and wildlife, and this trip was part of a larger project to document grizzly bears in the wild. Joining her on this journey was Marcus Brown, a 40-year-old seasoned guide with over 15 years of experience navigating the rugged terrains of the national park. Marcus was well respected for his deep understanding of wildlife behavior and ability to lead safely through unpredictable conditions. He had accompanied photographers, researchers, and adventurers on countless trips, earning a reputation for his calm demeanor and quick thinking. Tara and Marcus set out early from a trailhead near Many Glacier, a region renowned for its abundant wildlife. They planned to trek up a ridge known for grizzly activity, where Tara hoped to capture the bears in their natural environment without disrupting their behavior. Both were well prepared, carrying bear spray, communication devices, and survival gear. Tara's camera, a trusted tool in her line of work, hung securely around her neck as they ascended the steep, rocky trail. The first few hours of the hike were uneventful but rewarding. Tara photographed mountain goats grazing on distant cliffs and marmots darting between the rocks. The trail narrowed as they climbed higher, with sheer drops on one side and dense brush on the other. Marcus led the way, scanning for signs of wildlife while keeping a safe distance from potential danger zones. As they approached a ridge around midday, Marcus suddenly stopped. Just ahead, a massive grizzly bear stood on the trail, focusing on something in the bushes. Tara froze, her heart racing as she realized the gravity of the situation. Marcus signaled for her to stay calm and slowly retreat, but the movement caught the bear's attention. The bear turned toward them, its imposing figure now fully visible. The bear let out a low growl, a clear warning. Marcus and Tara tried to back away further, but the narrowness of the trail left them with limited options. Suddenly, the bear charged. Marcus reached for the bear spray and unleashed it in the bear's direction, but a strong gust of wind blew the spray back toward them, rendering it ineffective. Tara lost her footing in the chaos and fell onto the rocky slope below. The fall left her with a severely sprained ankle, making it nearly impossible for her to walk. Marcus, determined to protect Tara, grabbed her arm and helped her slide further down the slope to escape the bear's reach. The bear stopped at the edge of the ridge, pacing and growling as it assessed the situation. Marcus guided Tara into a gully below, where they found a fallen tree large enough to provide cover. They huddled together, trying to remain silent as the bear lingered above. The following hours were tense, every sound in the forest amplifying their fear that the bear might return. Tara and Marcus remained beneath the fallen tree, their breaths shallow as they tried to stay as still as possible. The bear's growls grew fainter, signaling it was moving further up the ridge. Marcus peered cautiously, his instincts telling him that the bear might not be entirely gone, but was no longer an immediate threat. Despite the reprieve, the danger was far from over. Tara winced as she adjusted her position, her injured ankle throbbing with pain. It was swollen and bruised, making her unable to stand or walk without assistance. Marcus, still alert, whispered reassurances and assessed their situation. They were in a steep gully surrounded by dense brush and rocky terrain, far from the main trail. Nightfall was approaching, and without proper shelter, they faced the added risks of exposure to cold temperatures and other predators. Marcus used his limited supplies to create a makeshift splint for Tara's ankle, fashioning it out of branches and strips of fabric from his backpack. Though it provided some support, Tara's mobility remained severely restricted. The forest around them grew darker, the fading sunlight casting long shadows stretching endlessly. Every rustle in the underbrush sent a wave of tension through them, their minds racing with the possibility that the bear might return. Hours passed in agonizing silence. Tara's mind replayed the events leading up to their predicament and felt fear and disbelief. Despite the pain and anxiety, she was grateful for Marcus's quick thinking and calm presence. His experience as a guide proved to be their lifeline in this precarious situation. At first light, the sound of a distant helicopter broke the stillness of the morning. Marcus activated their emergency beacon at night, hoping rescuers would pick up the signal. Relief washed over them as the helicopter drew closer, its blades cutting through the cold morning air. Marcus used a reflective emergency blanket to signal their location, and within minutes, the rescuers spotted them. Rangers descended into the gully, carefully helping Tara onto a stretcher. Her injuries required immediate medical attention, as the swelling in her ankle had worsened overnight. Marcus, though physically unharmed, showed signs of exhaustion from the ordeal. The rescuers commended his efforts, recognizing that his actions likely saved their lives. Back at the ranger station, Tara received first aid before being transported to a nearby hospital. Doctors confirmed that her ankle was severely sprained, requiring immobilization and weeks of recovery. Despite the pain, Tara was determined to continue her work as a wildlife photographer, using this experience to shed light on the challenges and dangers of capturing nature's raw beauty. The bear was not tracked or euthanized, as rangers determined it had only acted out of instinct and did not pose an ongoing threat. This decision sparked conversations about the delicate balance between human activities and wildlife conservation in areas like the National Park in northwestern Montana. While recovering, Tara wrote about her experience, emphasizing the importance of preparation, respect for wildlife, and the unpredictable nature of the wilderness. The story of Tara and Marcus's survival quickly spread, inspiring admiration for Marcus's bravery and Tara's resilience. Although reluctant to take credit, Marcus was hailed as a hero for his quick actions and unwavering support during the ordeal. For Tara, the incident became a defining moment in her career, reminding her of the fragile connection between humans and the natural world. As she recovered, Tara shared the images she had captured before the encounter, along with her story, raising awareness about the risks faced by photographers and adventurers in wild environments. Her work gained widespread recognition, and she advocated safer practices in wildlife photography, ensuring that others could learn from her harrowing experience.